Shut up and sit down.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to the Ditry Deuce podcast. As always, I'm Ben, and I'm here with my good friend Alan.
Hey!
And I think you had a couple of things that you wanted to rap about, so I'll let you take the mic.
Okay. Going with current events, two things. The shooting in Vegas. I have not ever hidden that I am pro Second Amendment, especially for women. But I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing to see all of these laws in place and that tragedy still occurring. I had kind of an interesting debate with one of the guys that goes to school with me, and he was saying, I don't feel that he's prior service Marine, quite a few combat deployments, more than 4. He was saying, I don't think civilians should have AR-15s. I don't think people should have high-capacity magazines. I'd be happy with having, a bolt action, a shotgun, and a handgun. And we were, like I said, talking about it. And it's interesting to see people fall on kind of both sides of the spectrum. I've never really cared for slide fire stocks or any of that stuff, but I do worry what is going to come of this, because historically, when we had the Clinton gun ban in 1994, I know I hear people on both sides of the fence saying it decreased crime or that crime increased with black market weapons. And the kind of the biggest talking point that we came to is, you look at Australia, and when they outright did a ban after the shooting that they haven't had, to my knowledge, after research, have not had any other incidents like that. However, a lot of other types of crime and all that stuff went up. So, have you run into anything at work or amongst your peers?
Nothing specific as far as opinions, but I think it's an interesting question. When you look at the data and you look at logic, they're kind of at odds with each other. Logically, you would think, hey, we take away the guns, there's going to be less shootings. But when you look at unbiased sources that have looked at the correlation between gun ownership, either in states that are pro-gun and have a lot of Second Amendment rights and supports for it, or even in different countries that have higher levels of gun ownership, it just doesn't pan out. There's no correlation between how many guns are in the country and how many shootings occur. And that's even including mass shootings. It's sort of weird. I mean, we are the outlier in all this data. We have a lot of mass shootings, and we have a lot more guns than anybody. But when you take us out of the equation, into the equation, it doesn't matter. Guns aren't correlated with gun violence, and it seems pretty counterintuitive. It doesn't make logical sense. But look at Mexico. Mexico, right next door to us, they have huge crackdown on gun ownership. It is incredibly hard to buy legally a gun in Mexico, and there are people shooting each other all the time down there, even among different states. Right now I'm in Texas, and I'm in the safest major city in the United States, statistically, and everybody's got a gun. I go to Walmart, and there's dudes with packing guns all the time, and I've never seen anybody shot. Look at other American cities like Detroit. Detroit has a huge crackdown on guns, and the only people who have them, since they're so hard to get, are the criminals. Now, what have heard argued before is it works for places like England, and it works for places like Australia because they're geographically isolated, right? And Detroit isn't a fair example because Michigan may pass a law that says, make guns incredibly hard for everyone to get. But some of these southern states, some of these western states that are very pro-gun, you can legally buy a gun down there and then drive to Michigan. And there's no border guard stopping you from importing guns, therefore their gun bans are ineffective. My counter to that, when everybody says that, look at Puerto Rico. It's an American protectorate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's American soil, so you can't say that that it's a function of being a third world country or anything. It has all the rights guaranteed to it that American citizens do. It's an island. It's geographically isolated, so nobody's just driving across the border from a neighboring state. Guns are incredibly hard to get there. Like a concealed carry license, oh my god, forget about it. Right?
Kind of like California, right?
Yeah. And maybe even worse than California. It is incredibly hard to legally own any sort of gun there, right? And the violence down there, the shootings, are out of fucking control. I had a soldier who was from Puerto Rico. I'm not going to give any names because it's his business. But his family stayed down there. His dad was a retired sergeant, and I guess he was renting his house out. And the guys who were renting it weren't paying the rent, so he had them evicted. Those guys came back, shot the dad, shot the mom, shot the daughter, and took the 13-year-old son, tried to shoot him. They ran out of ammo, so they beat the shit out of him, threw him off a bridge, and he lived.
I assume everybody else died.
Everybody else died. It was a fucking massacre. And that's just par for the fucking course down there. And if guns if guns are the root cause of gun violence, then why are there all these gun violence, all these violent episodes happening in places where they're banned? I mean, the data just doesn't support it.
It's interesting because especially in my course of study, something I often see is that things are more complicated than they appear at first. A really good example of that would be, suicide rates of crime, all of that stuff. So, I don't know. I'd like to do more looking into it and then come back to it, especially once we start seeing legislation get pushed through and basically the aftershocks of this.
So I have a theory that I haven't heard anybody bring up before. Maybe it's sort of spoken about in passing, and it isn't guns. But as to why America has so many mass shootings and these crazy homicides that you only see in America, right?
Okay.
My question is, what drugs was that dude on?
I've heard this argument before, and it is often in passing. Was he on antidepressants, antipsychotics? I haven't seen anybody pay any consistent attention to it, but there did seem to be a trend as to a lot of these mass shootings being carried out by people on medication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's spoken about quietly.
I think nobody wants to take it on because there's a lot of money behind it. But if you look at, statistically, if you look at SSRIs, right, one of the major class of drugs that's given for depression, statistically, it is no more effective than therapy, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy, where you sit down with an intelligent, well-trained psychologist and you just talk shit out, right? Taking the drugs is no more effective. However, it's also addicting. It's hard to come off. and it has incredibly crazy side effects, of which, I mean, how long have we had these drugs? Less than a generation, and we're giving these drugs to kids.
Yeah.
There's no long-term studies, because we haven't had the drugs for that long, of what these drugs do to people's brains. And we have a long history of people taking these drugs and going fucking crazy and shooting people. Now, all the pharmaceuticals are like, no, it's completely unrelated. But, I mean, look at University of Texas. 2017, dude stabbed 4 people with a machete, killing 1. He's on Zoloft. Right? University of Florida, 2014. Dude opens fire in a library, wounds 3, is shot and killed by police. He was on Seroquel. Seattle Pacific University, 2013. Dude opened fire with a shotgun, killing 1 dude and wounding another. He's on Prozac, right? Sparks Middle School in Nevada in 2013. Dude came in, killed a teacher, 2 classmates, and committed suicide on Prozac. 2010, a Charles Fontanier preschool. Dude comes in, holds the entire class hostage with 2 swords. He was on some unnamed antidepressant. Philadelphia in 2014, a dude murdered 6 people with an axe, including a 14-year-old girl. The dude who committed Sandy Hook killed 20 students, 6 adults, and he was on an antipsychotic. It just goes on. Like, I can keep listing them. That dude who shot everyone in Aurora, Colorado, he was on fucking antidepressants too. The Columbine shooters, they're on antidepressants.
You know, there is a specific population, and it may just be personal familiarity with it, but why I'm for all of the vets that I know, a good part of them are on antidepressants or antipsychotics, like on some sort of medication. I've seen that pushback from the VA, and it being, kind of like, we're not just going to, give you disability benefits because you have PTSD or possibly other issues. We're actually going to give you treatment, and that treatment is medication the majority of the time.
You know why? Because it's easy. It's incredibly hard to train somebody. There's an art to it, to be able to talk to somebody and empathize with their problems and talk them down from these destructive mental states to something that's, not destructive and helpful. It's hard. It's hard to find trained people to do that. And if you are good at that and you're skilled and educated, you have to pay people to do that, right? Drugs, although they're expensive in the long term, are a cheap, easy stopgap measure. And that's what we've done.
So why aren't we seeing that more amongst the vet population, who seem to typically have firearms and training and all of that?
I think we do. I think that accounts for a large portion of either, you see these guys go out and commit some sort of shooting, domestic violence, something like that, or suicide. I think that's a big thing that we're not talking about. The suicide rate in the Army has fucking exploded. We lose way more people to suicide than we did to any combat fatalities during any phase of the recent wars that we've been in. And it wasn't always like that. Soldiers used to have, like in World War II, even Vietnam era, Korean War, they had a lower suicide rate than even the general public. And I think it was about 2002. I gotta check my numbers off the top of my head. But 2002, I think it peaked about 2014, about the same time coinciding with all these drugs hitting the market and becoming widely distributed. We saw the suicide rate just rise and rise and rise and rise and rise.
There's a guy that did an interesting study regarding young men suicide and during a time of war. Durkheim, his book labeled Suicide. Very interesting read, very boring. Just look it up on Cliff Notes or Wikipedia. But long story short, suicide, he argued that suicide was a direct reflection of the social issues within a society, especially during a time of war.
I could see that.
So he was essentially arguing that society as a whole is almost like an organism, and people committing suicide were committing the ultimate selfless act of checking out of that society, just being like, you know what, fuck you guys, I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that, just not wanting to be part of the problem and just removing yourself.
Now, what about these people that are not only not wanting to be part of the problem and removing themselves, but they're causing as much harm as possible to society? They're shooting up kids, they're shooting up concerts, they're creating an environment of terror. They're actively harming that society. So I'm kind of wondering, where do the drugs play into that to make people or potentially influence people to not only want to check themselves out, because that's ultimately the result. Like, nobody does that and thinks, I'm going to live. But what makes them want to commit that level of harm before going out?
I think it kind of varies person to person what their motivations are.
But I mean, at the core, there's got to be something common that makes them want to do that.
I think any sort of mass shooter, spree shooter, at their core, they at least have to have a disdain and disgust for the people that they're killing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it. And I think maybe who those people represent and why they're disgusted might be different person to person. But another aspect, when I know we've kind of talked about it in previous podcasts, is there's a huge social aspect. We're doing two things, especially to this upcoming generation, that are pretty unprecedented in human history. We are taking away the social structures, the family, the tribe, the friendship network, and the direct human interaction, and we're replacing it with isolationism and machine contact. Right?
Constant media contact.
And then when people, especially kids, flounder in this very alien environment, we say something's wrong with them, and we shoot them full of drugs that are highly psychoactive, and we have no precedence for long-term exposure.
You know, I don't know how much exposure you have to that, or basically the separation that's occurred even between our generation and people 5 to 10 years older than us. But I'll give you a quick example. I met this girl in my class. She's really cute. She's smart. She's funny. She's from Alabama, and we went to a Mexican place and had a couple drinks. And she wanted to ask me about stuff in the military, and she's the same major as I am, sociology. And I was trying to explain the concept of the military as an institution and as a separate institution, and more specifically, a separate entity than normal American life, and the transition for people to that institution and then back. So we were talking about a lot of that stuff, and my social interactions and her social interactions came up, and dating and stuff like that came up, and she was talking about meeting guys on Tinder and the guys just wanting to hook up. But I asked her, it's like, what about like the grocery store? Where else would you meet them? Why would you try to meet people on Tinder? And it's a reoccurring thing. I always thought Tinder was just for hooking up with people.
Mm-hmm.
But Tinder pushes itself, and it pushes itself hard. People talk about it, and it's becoming one of those things where a lot of guys are like, oh yeah, Tinder's for hooking up, and a lot of girls are like, I have no idea how to meet people. meet guys anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it always surprises me to see that where it's not acceptable, and I don't know, it's kind of nice. Her going up and talking to me in class was an exception to that, which I hope continues in her life. I'm still on the fence. I got to get to know her better, but she's funny otherwise. I don't know. I keep hearing that. I hear that from the girls that I work with in the office. It's like, oh, how'd you meet that guy? Tinder. I don't think it's going to be anything serious. He just wants to hook up. I'm just like, go, I don't know, check out Christian Mingle. Why would I do that? That'd be a waste of time. All they want to do is get married. But there's nothing in between.
Yeah. I think, especially this upcoming generation, it's going to be incredibly difficult for women to meet good quality guys. And I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for good quality guys to demonstrate their worth to women because we have no social interaction. I mean, when you think about it historically, when we lived in communities, you would talk to somebody every day. You knew everyone in that community. You knew who was a good guy. You knew who was a shitbag. Mm-hmm. And that happened with just the daily interaction that you'd have. Walking to work, riding the whatever conveyance you have, working in the fields with whoever, or, I mean, depending on the era that you're talking about. But you always had interactions with everyone in that level of society. Now, we drive to work in a completely closed off box. We don't talk to anybody, right? Mm-hmm. You work and you stay basically in your lane, and it's considered unprofessional to date somebody at work. And then if something goes wrong, you have that awkwardness of like, oh, we broke up, but we're still working together.
I've seen. Yeah.
And then there's institutions like the military, which it is specifically illegal fraternization for you to date people at work, unless they're your exact rank and you have no ability to influence anything in their career, which is extremely unlikely. So there's stuff like that where you're just not going to meet anybody. And what's left? The internet. And every dude with a keyboard and an erection is going to be on there. Trolling for chicks.
Yeah. And it's kind of an interesting thing. Like, once again, talking to the girls at work, especially, and some of my other friends, what's the list of the good guys? It's usually construction's iffy, but it's usually cops, firefighters, prior service, like basically whoever makes the hero list. Mm-hmm. And then that's about it in terms of what's referred to as real men. I continue to hear that term, and there was an interesting point brought up by one of my friends who was saying, it's almost like there's a war on masculinity. Like, it's not cool to work out and get in, and be able to fight your way out of a paper bag. All these guys are wearing tight, skinny jeans and wearing makeup now and all of that. And he said it seems to be like there's a consistent push to move away from traditional masculinity. And all the women I know tend to appreciate a guy with a build, a beard, that has his shit together.
Exactly. So who's pushing it?
I don't know. With certainty, media is pushing it heavily. Because you look at, like, clothing, different trends that are going on. Like, it's not cool to be a working guy with a pickup truck anymore. And it's a very interesting thing to see, because now it's like the trades are getting back. Before, I married a mechanic, people would be like, well, good luck with that. Whereas nowadays it's like, a mechanic, he's probably going to make as much, if not more, than somebody with a bachelor's degree if he works at a dealership.
Yeah. And depending, what that bachelor's degree's in.
Yeah.
Have a master's degree in feminist dance therapy or whatever. Do you want fries with that? That's about all you're going to need to know.
Man, if only... So, here, we'll change gears a little bit.
Okay.
I'm taking a feminist what do you call it? Women's studies class, and it's interesting from an educational standpoint. But what I've gathered from the class is that it's promoting a lot of victimization, and the other side of that is promoting a lot of people to say, "Hey, are you a victim of any of these things? Are you repressed?" All of that, and then if so, these are actions you can take. So, on one hand, it may be good for recognition. On the other hand, everybody thinks they have something or they're part of something. At some point, somebody within it's referred to as the LGBTQ bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. Don't get me started. That whole movement is sucking up the alphabet.
Okay, that movement has shifted focus from hate crime laws, from affirmative action. They've shifted movement from that to rebranding and education. The rebranding being, instead of making retroactive laws or laws that, offer protection after the fact, let's change how people growing up look at these things. Let's make it so that a gay couple down the street isn't out of the norm. Let's make it so that it's okay. And not only is it okay, but you see it in cartoons. You see that it's, it's all just love with whoever you want to be and however you want to identify.
I think that whole movement is a victim of their own success. What happens to the soldier when they win the war? No need for soldier. Thank you for your service. Goodbye.
Yeah. To anybody that thinks they want to start a revolution, I caution you to look at what happens to the revolutionaries, because they are the biggest threat to the new form of government.
Exactly. And that's why major revolutions are always followed by some sort of pogrom.
Yeah, cleanup.
Yeah. But yeah, exactly. I think what happened is they were fighting for a good cause. Hey, everyone should be able to marry, have sex with whoever they want without being put in jail, right? And I think that's legitimate. I'm a believer in personal freedoms. You, and if anyone you want to, as long as they're consenting, want to do whatever the fuck you want, I am totally cool with that, as long as it doesn't violate anybody else's rights.
We are in agreement. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then all of this culminated in the Supreme Court decision that legalized gay marriage throughout the land. And after they're done with the champagne and party favors, what do? Like, if you built your entire career, if you built your entire self-identity as the person who fights for gay rights, and you win that, you go to bed, you wake up tomorrow, who the fuck are you?
Well, now you're the person fighting for transsexual rights. I think it's one of the greatest hypocrisies that I have ever been party to and seen, is the people fighting for the rights of others as a job.
Exactly. And that, if you notice, this whole transsexual thing wasn't on the radar. It wasn't on the radar for the entire country at all until they won the Supreme Court decision for gay marriage. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, boys can be girls and girls can be boys.
However you identify.
I'm sorry, but that makes no fucking sense. And this is where you're crossing the line. I'm going to get up on my soapbox for a minute.
We're talking freedoms, man. You do whatever you want.
Exactly. I'm a believer in freedoms. If you want to be a dude and wear a dress, I've known some dudes who like to wear dresses. I don't give a fuck, right? If you are born a girl and you want to say you're a boy, or vice versa, I don't give a fuck, right? But at what point, and I think this quote, I'm kind of paraphrasing something Dave Chappelle said, modern philosopher of our times. I'm all for personal freedom, but at what point does it cross the line where it's mandated for me to have to believe in and endorse whatever crazy concept you have.
When you start going into bathrooms that are marked for either or both.
Truthfully, even at that, I don't give a fuck. Like, if you ever walked into a male bathroom and saw a girl in there,
yeah,
would you kick her out and be like, oh no, you're going to see my penis?
I don't give a shit. She's using the bathroom.
Yeah, I don't give a shit either.
Tell
Now,
her to use
I know
the
I know that there are some women that might automatically assume that a dude in the women's restroom is a rapist, and that might be accurate or might not. I don't know. I've accidentally walked into a woman's bathroom before, just not paying attention, went into the wrong one. Shit happens. I'm not a rapist. But I think where you're crossing the line is you're redefining reality to something that's not real based on somebody's perceptions of it, right?
I will tell you exactly what the argument against that is.
Shoot.
The argument against that is that anything that involves society is a social construction and is only real because we agree to make it real. For example, punching people in the face only has an inherent negative value because we all agree that it has a negative value. You could argue that it has an inherently negative value by harming people, but it's still something that we all agree on.
Okay, when I hear stuff like that, I start to think that punching certain people in the face may have an inherently positive value.
Didn't say they were my personal beliefs, but I hear this every day.
There are some things that are social construction, right? There are also some social constructions that are pretty uniform across all societies throughout history, regardless of race, religion, creed, color, economic status, period in time. And one of those is that people who happen to be born with a penis are male, and people who happen to be born with a vagina are female. That's sort of been the standard.
The difference between sex and gender. Sex being the organs, gender being the social construction in recognizing those organs on people. I hear it all the time, but I wholeheartedly agree with you. Societies have taken a very functional approach to it and said, hey, these are the roles that you have if you have these organs, because it perpetuates and promotes a functioning society.
Okay.
So while
you know what? I'll buy it. We'll play devil's advocate or reductio ad absurdum. Now,
I'm just saying, between tribal societies and even modern society, the roles that we have currently are what work. If they didn't work, then we wouldn't do it.
Yes.
We are, however, modifying them to fit changes within society.
And then people go fucking crazy and start shooting up schools.
Yeah. Unrelated, by the way.
I'm sure. I'm sure fucking with the total structure of the total psychological structure, the total chemical structure, the total behavioral structure, the total sociological structure, and now the basis of the sex that you were born has no correlation with any of these people going fucking crazy and killing others or killing themselves. I'm sure that completely undermining every aspect of what it means to be a human being for basically since the time that we climbed down out of the trees until about 20 years ago has nothing to do with the fact that everyone's going crazy.
By the way, Durkheim is rolling in his grave.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's okay. We're gonna have to come back to it.
Hold on, you want me to do my devil's advocate riff?
Do the devil's advocate, but I'm saying we need to do more research on this because otherwise it'll be a one-sided conversation. But his whole thing on suicide being a reflection of the issues within society, we definitely need to hit that a little harder because it has everything you said by him would have direct correlation. Like you and him standing side by side.
Okay.
And he'd be like, this is why you have these problems. Please give me grant money and I'll write another book. But yeah.
Okay.
Well, what's your devil's advocate? Let's hear it.
So I'll buy, for the moment, I'll put on my crazy cap and say everything, including your basic sexual makeup of who the fuck you are, is a complete idea and has no basis in reality, and we just made it the fuck up. Okay. Now, if you look at the amount of people in society that identify as being transsexual, right? Their boy thinks they're a girl, girl thinks they're a boy. The numbers are really low. Really low. Less than 1%. Right?
So why does it...
If you look at the number of people who suffer from schizophrenia, there's ballpark around 5 times more people who suffer from schizophrenia. So for every boy who thinks there's a girl, there's 5 boys out there who think that they're Napoleon, and they have the same justification. I feel that such and such is this way. Therefore, everyone else in the society must validate it based on nothing more than my opinion, right? But the people with schizophrenia, or suffering from some sort of psychological delusion that they're Napoleon, we put them in a padded room. But
or give them pills.
Or give them pills. But the people who say, no, I'm a girl and I really want to be a boy, or not that I want to, that I physically am, we say, oh, that's completely valid. Even though more people suffer from schizophrenia. We'd clarify that as a mental disorder. So how are you going to parse the two? It doesn't make any fucking sense. Right?
In which we go back to politics. You know, follow the money, follow basically, you know, who's crying the loudest about whatever the social issue of the time is.
Exactly. And not, again, it's less than 1% of people in America say that they're transsexual, right? So who's screaming all the time? It's not less than 1% making all this noise. It's somebody making noise on behalf of them.
Yeah.
And it's all that leftover crowd from the gay rights movement who just can't do anything other than scream. And my biggest thing is, what the fuck are you screaming about? Right? Like, I get it, you know, early waves of feminism. What do we want? We want the right not to be beaten. When do we want it? Now. What do we want? We want equal pay. When do we want it? Now. Right? Gay rights. What do we want? The right to have sex with our chosen partner without being thrown in jail. Right? Or killed. Right? And then, when they got that, they started removing these sodomy laws off the books. Hey, what do we want? The right to marriage. When do we want it? Now, right? What's left for the transsexual community and all the people that are agitating on their behalf? What the fuck are they agitating for? If you want to be a boy and wear a dress, perfectly fucking legal.
The thing is
if you want to be a boy and marry a boy, or boy and marry a girl, or be a boy, say you're a girl, and marry a boy, again, entirely fucking legal. Any way you want to cut it now, it's entirely legal.
But
so what the fuck are we arguing?
Not socially accepted, which is what they're fighting about. And with that social acceptance, the idea with that social acceptance is there will no longer be job discrimination. Amongst the transsexual community, they have a really high rate of suicide, predominantly from social rejection, amongst several other issues. I will lightly touch on the correlation between... Okay, you know, we won't even get into mental health and transsexuals, but I will say this. It's usually... the high rate of suicide is usually attributed to social rejection. So that's what they're fighting for, is social acceptance and equal rights.
And see, that's where you cross the line. Okay, equal rights, I'm not buying that one. They entirely have it. A right is something protected by law, saying the government will not throw you in jail, deprive you of life, limb, or property without due process of law for doing X, right? People have the right to free speech in America. That doesn't mean that they're completely free of any consequences for anything that they say, right?
Social or institutional consequences?
Provided that the institution is not the United States government, both.
Okay. The problem is a lot of times the institution is the government. This is... You're sitting, right?
Sure.
Okay. So, for example, that whole having the right to express or assume the identity of whoever they want, that is not... How do I put it? Gender reassignment surgery in the military would be an example of their rights being oppressed because the military is not allowing them to do it. Which the reality of it is the military is not necessarily paying for them to do it. They're not keeping them from doing it. It's them not being able to afford it.
Well, tough shit. Like, there's a lot of things that I would like for the government to pay for, free for me.
But those aren't core parts of your identity, are they?
Maybe it is. You know what? Here's the thing. You know who Bo Jackson is?
I always feel like the bad guy between us.
Maybe.
Yeah, fuck you, buddy.
You know who Bo Jackson is?
I've heard of the name.
Okay. For I know you passing familiarization. For everyone out there, Bo Jackson was this dude, professional football player in the 80s. He played for the Raiders, and he ended up being, taken out for having he actually dislocated his hip in a play. But he was probably, and if you want to argue sports with me, I don't fucking care, you win. But probably one of the most physically dominant players, maybe human beings, ever to walk the face of the earth. Right? In an era before steroids, right? This dude played professional football and then as a hobby on his off time played professional baseball. The amount of people on earth that could ever be good enough to play either one of those sports is incredibly small, and this dude did it simultaneously. He was an incredible powerhouse. He was fucking unstoppable. Like, you'd watch him hit people, and it was like a fucking giant playing against children. Like, they would just go bouncing the fuck off of him because he was such an unstoppably powerful human being. When he would strike out at baseball, he would take the bat and snap it over his leg or over his head. Right? The same way that I would do with like a chopstick, he would just snap it over his thigh. I mean, I'm selling him up, but watch some of the highlight footage of Bo Jackson. He had a really short career before he took that injury. But the time that he was on there, fucking unstoppable human being. Right?
You know what they say, candle that burns twice as bright.
Yes. Okay. So what's my point with all this? I would love to be Bo Jackson, right? I would love to have this incredibly powerful frame that swats baseballs into fucking orbit or crushes other men's skulls, something that he's just born with. I mean, if you look at his backstory, his history, like even as a kid, he was like a fucking monster for how powerful he was. I would love to be that person, but I was born to be this person. And me wanting to be that person, or me feeling like I got gypped out of being that person, doesn't fucking change it. Right? And if we have some sort of like pseudoscientific thing like steroids that could make me into this fictitious person that I want to be, why is it the government's responsibility to pay for that? Like, if I want to go out and spend all my money on fucking steroids and get that big, fucking more power to me, right? But why is that anybody else's responsibility to deal with some mental shit that I got going on?
Well, you would think it shouldn't be, but it goes back to that whole thing of how the perception of how you were raised is still considered a social construct. Regardless of your body's physical ability, everything else is a social construct.
What do the feminists think about this?
About
this whole transgender ridiculousness?
It's from what I've seen, it's kind of a mixed bag. Keep in mind, not a lot of feminists. I would say the mild ones talk to me. The rest look at me and my beard and all of that and assume I hate and beat women, which is strange. But it seems to be one of those like, hey, we got ours, and it's a strengthening of community, but everybody still looks down on trans people. Mostly because trans people tend to be poor, tend to have issues, and tend to be all over the place and create a very negative image to whatever they're associated with.
I would just imagine, thinking about it, that feminists would be up in arms about dudes trying to steal womanhood from them.
But the thing is, it's not dudes trying to steal womanhood from them. It's the big thing I continue to hear is human beings, that we are all universally human beings. And the idea is that gender as a social construction is something that is fluid with our understanding.
Okay, well, as fluid as it is, in 20 years, there's not going to be one person born with a vagina that's playing any sort of professional sports at the woman's level. Transgender dudes are taking over every sport, and they're fucking crushing women at it. I mean, who's that? I don't remember his fucking name. He was some sort of Olympian, and he chopped his dick off, and it was a big thing. If he gets Woman of the Year, if you get a dude winning Woman of the Year, at what point do women say fucking bullshit? And you got dudes like Fallon Fox out there who don't disclose to their opponents that they are fucking men who just had surgery or whatever, right? And they get out there and they do professional cage fighting and they fucking destroy real women. Like, there's one opponent that this Fallon Fox dude, like, crushed her eye socket, her whole, like, orbital. That's fucking bullshit. And she didn't know she was walking in there in the cage with somebody who is biologically fucking male.
So we go back to the distinction of sex, not gender.
Okay, well, women and feminists specifically better get off their ass. Otherwise, they're not going to have any role left in any sort of sports, because men are going to shove them out of it by claiming to be women.
And still raking in all the money, right?
You know, I've got a question.
Shoot.
If we're buying this, everything is just a social construct, and literally factual reality has no play in anything. Does that mean that the Bible's correct? Literally correct?
What do you
the
mean?
world's made in 8 days correct?
No. That is like a totally fucked up leap of logic. No. The idea behind
people believe it. More people believe that the world is made in 8 days than believe that guys can be girls and girls can be guys. And if all it takes for something to be factually true is for people to believe it, then why can't geology be a social construct? Why can't archaeology be a social construct? Why can't any of the facts of science be social constructs? And if I believe in a book that says I have the right to oppress women or stone people to death or own slaves, if I believe in that, there's plenty of holy books out there that endorse those things.
There's a very simple test, and it's the test of universal truth. Archaeology is, we'll say physics, geology, are all of those, and the information and laws universal to all societies across all time? Most people would say yes. And that's what separates them from being social constructions, is that they follow, I'm not going to say like a natural law, but more so a universal truth. That they are transcendent of being social constructions.
And having an X and Y chromosome isn't science?
It's biological science, but the thing is how we recognize it that's considered the construction. Nobody's arguing that, the dangly bits are for the, are recognized as male reproductive organs. It's how we view people with that, or how those people choose to associate with that.
Exactly. I'm an archaeologist. I find 2 nearby cities in the desert that used to be Sodom and Gomorrah, and therefore I interpret that the same way that somebody who would see, a penis and interpret that person as a male, I interpret that as being proof that the Bible is 100% accurate.
So the test to that would be that if all archaeologists across all times found the same thing that you did, if they did, then it would be considered science and universal truth. If they did not, then it wouldn't be. Just kind of like the whole world being flat, because everybody since then challenged it and found that it was not, in fact, the truth. That's what prevented it from being, I guess you would say, universal truth.
So
I will give you an example of universal truth.
Okay.
Some examples. It is absolutely necessary for reproduction to have people with, we'll say, one person with male genitalia, one person with female genitalia. It is not universal that the guy has to stick around. It's not universal that the woman has to take care of the kid. It's not even universal that the woman has to breastfeed, or that it has to be one guy or several women. That's the difference. The difference being what absolutely takes place across all societies in time versus what could be recognized or viewed differently at different times in different societies.
So going off that, which then is the society in which women across the board played no motherhood role, or didn't breastfeed, or fathers universally abandoned their children? Where is that society? Or where is the society that they're talking about where boys can be girls and girls can be boys?
And therein lies the problem. We are going into uncharted territory, and it only works because because we've beaten evolution. Historically, it's always been men have roles, women have roles. Those genders may be a little bit blurred, but the ultimate function has been for women to take care of children. That burden has always been on them. And for men to, most of the time, provide for the family. But there's been a necessity to have both for reproduction and the continuing of the human race.
I don't think that we've beaten evolution so much that we've beaten the evolutionary pressures on us.
Okay,
We still have... I know I'm kind of like parsing it kind of thin, but we still have all the evolutionary baggage of the society that we've had since we climbed down out of the trees. We've had gender roles, we've had social concepts and societies, and across the board we're fucking with that now. And we haven't changed evolutionarily.
And that's the thing, is that everything to this point has served a function, and the things that have not served a function have gone by the wayside or died off. A society in which women would abandon children would quickly die off and be forgotten to history.
Yes.
Everything to this point has been for the function and perpetuation of society.
Exactly.
So now that we are changing that, we are unraveling what is functional.
The
and
function
going
and
towards
perpetuation of society.
Yes.
Look at places. Japan is the perfect example. But really, you can go anywhere in the industrialized world where we've gotten away from traditional roles, either society or technologically, just that social interaction. Japan, for technology, is far ahead leading the field. For like we are living in fucking 2017 right now. They're in like 3017. Those people are in the fucking future, and they're fucking miserable. Like if you look at just the statistics for their birth rate, it's dropping through the floor. And why is it dropping through the floor? Because nobody talks to each other. Nobody has any actual social interaction aside from all their little machines and doodads.
There's no point to having a family because when you look at it objectively, it's expensive, it's messy, it's a commitment, and it requires an incredible amount of sacrifice.
It does. And getting a little PG-13, we'll say, there's a lot of porn. There's a lot of porn, and their porn is like in the fucking future. I'm sure there's dudes in Japan right now having sex with some sort of futuristic sex robot. And it's enough of a surrogate to meet your basic evolutionary drives, and it's a lot easier than going out and finding an actual woman, you know?
Yeah. That's kind of a very interesting thing to look at, is going back to that whole, like, what are the men, who are the real men now? I also look at, it's like, who are the real women? Like, if I went on a date, and I've done this, if I went on a date at this point, and somebody was like on their phone like 2 or 3 times, I'd just be like, well, it's been nice and pleasant to meet you, but this isn't going to work. Because the socialization for respect and traditional values, I wouldn't see it as being there. No. But I think that's the big thing to uncover, is at what point did everything start to change, and what are the factors that influence that change? The media would be one. Education. I'm getting to the bottom of where they're brewing the Kool-Aid. I am. I'm getting to it. In the meantime, and let me take your class. But
I'm not even sure that there is one driving force. I think it's just a perfect shitstorm of technology, of different radical groups trying to redefine what it is to be a human, and drug companies trying to make a profit off all of this uncertainty, and just modern society. It's so far off anything we've ever experienced.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going, but probably nowhere good.
No, it's not going. We're not looking at this and saying, hey, things are going to get better. This is going to bring in a new age in which Americans are on top, which, subject for another thing. For everybody that hates America and says this place sucks, go somewhere else. Yeah. And then see what life is like for everybody else. A very interesting challenge to all the people that complain about the poor in the third world. Start giving them some of your money. Why don't you work some overtime and send it overseas?
Yeah.
Get me on the soapbox now.
I know.
I hope we stay friends through this, because it really seems like we fight a lot, and I don't know. I know we for the most part wholeheartedly agree, but sometimes it doesn't seem that way.
Well, I think you're playing devil's advocate. We need to have somebody on the podcast who genuinely believes these things, not you just kind of representing their beliefs for them, so we can just fucking destroy them.
Unfortunately, I have some people like that are my friends, and I say unfortunately because, you don't do that to your friends.
Yeah.
I just kind of, whenever we talk...
We need somebody that we fucking hate their guts.
They'll check out.
I know.
But, I don't know, I look at it this way. Don't hate them, just go pound rivets. Like, at the end of the day, when all of this crap comes to a head, it's like, subject for another time.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. It's kind of sad to see where it's going. I can only imagine somebody that grew up in the 50s in, like, 1950s white America and is looking at stuff now and are just going, I'm glad I'm on my way out.
Yeah.
And I'm sad I saw it go this far.
I don't know. Should we call it there? A nice depressing end?
Yeah, let's call it. God bless America. And salute the flag.
God save America.
We're working on it. Next time, let's cover currency. I don't know. I'm pretty up to date on most social issues, so we'll get together. We'll cover some more stuff. But yeah, it's interesting to see kind of how society's starting to unravel at the seams.
Yep, definitely.
Right. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.